Airplane, one railroad. We begin with the crash of that TransAsia plane in Taiwan, caught on this harrowing videotape. We want to bring in now Deborah Hersman. She's the former NTSB chairman and president of the National Safety Council. Ms. Hersman, thanks so much for being on New Day.
Good morning.
Let's start with the airplane crash. There are some developments this morning that I would imagine will help investigators figure out what happened. There is a Mayday call that came in from the pilots. Let me play you this clip.
Mayday, Mayday, engine flame out.
It's very short, Ms. Hersman, but you hear him say, Mayday, Mayday, engine flame out. What does that mean?
So they're talking here about potentially the complete loss of an engine, and they're having to compensate for that in the cockpit. But this is only a portion or a fragment of the conversation that's probably taking place. Once they are able to read out that cockpit voice recorder, they're actually going to have a lot more information and a full picture about what was being communicated inside the cockpit between the pilots, not just outgoing to air traffic control.
Can a plane ever recover from an engine flame out?
You know, pilots are trained to deal with emergency situations, including engine flameouts. One of the challenges that you have, certainly in an environment where you're in and around an airport on takeoff, on landing, is that you're low and that you're slow. You may not have the air speed and you may not have the altitude to make the recovery that you need to make. But pilots are trained, and so we want to make sure that we understand exactly what happened mechanically here, but also what the operators understood and what procedures and steps they took, if they were effective or ineffective, and understand why.
So with this crash, there happens to be, as you know, this stunning video of the plane going down. How will investigators dissect every frame of this video to get more clues?
I will tell you that the advent of technology, particularly video or image technology, is incredibly helpful to investigators. We used it at the NTSB in accident after accident, even things like using a security camera to identify frame by frame the collapse of the interstate bridge in Minneapolis as it fell. That information can corroborate the physical on scene and the other information that's gathered to really paint a picture. And again, it allows people to see what's happening, and you can bring in other data to support the investigation.
This plane was an ATR 72. That's the model. That model was also involved in another TransAsia crash. Is there a problem with that model of plane?
You know, I think what's important is to understand what happened in each of these crashes involving this carrier with this aircraft. It's not unusual for a carrier to have multiple aircraft in their fleet of a certain type. In fact, that makes a lot of sense. And so that means you train your pilots on that type of aircraft, you maintain that type of aircraft, and you actually get very good at it. And so it is important to understand what happened in each of those events and identify if there are any common threads.
Let's talk about the deadly railroad crash here in Metro North. Metro North is the big commuter system that takes 300,000 commuters in and out of New York City every day. And as you know, there were 6 people killed this week when it hit a stalled SUV on the track. What do you glean from the details you know thus far?
You know, it's still early in the investigation. I think everyone needs to really understand what happened, how that driver ended up on the tracks. It's so important to stay clear of those tracks and to make sure that all of the devices are working, whether it's the grade crossing arms, the traffic signals that help to cue the traffic up. But again, each driver also has a responsibility to pay attention to what's going on. Do not enter that area where the tracks are unless you know that you can clear it. That's really important. 2,000 vehicle-to-train crashes occur every year, resulting in 250 fatalities. We saw the tragic consequences of that this week.
Gosh, looking at that aftermath is so tragic. Deborah Hersman, thanks so much for all the information.
Thank you.